In this walkthrough, we're going to take a look at incident reporting and investigations. These form part of the occupational health and safety system inside Dynamics 365. As you can see, the occupational health and safety module is a solution just like any of the other modules from the home screen. Clicking on that will take us through to the occupational health and safety workspace, from which a safety manager or an operations manager or other interested party can get quick insights into what is happening around the business from a safety perspective. We have some shortcuts at the top to record incidents, record permits to work and inspections. Underneath that, we have an aggregated number of open incidents, open investigations, and open permits to work. These tiles are configurable depending on the requirements in the business. At the top, we also have some additional information. As an example, we have some graphs. The incident classification graph is just an indication of what can be done in counting the number of incidents of different types across the business. Obviously, these graphs will be set up in accordance with your safety department to reflect the reporting that's needed in your specific company. On the right-hand side, we have a list of the incidents in the system with some shortcuts to subsets of those lists. So, for example, we have all incidents, we have all closed incidents, and then incidents reported by myself, etc. Not only limited to incidents, we can configure this to other entities like permits to work. So the scenario we're going to follow now is that one of our employees, a guy named Tony, a guy named John, who is our warehouse manager, who was injured whilst coming through the security turnstile last night. The purpose of the incident reporting system is to be as simple and efficient as possible to classify the essential details of the incident as quickly as possible. So if I click the Record New Incident button, there is a very simple set of fields that need to be filled out to get started. We need to give a description, which I'm going to copy and paste in here. The description is that the employee was injured in the turnstile. We specify the date and time. This happened last night at 1900. The incident type needs to be specified. Now again, these classifications will be specific to your organization. I'm highlighting the list here so that you can get an understanding of the different types of incidents that can be managed within the system. They don't necessarily all have to be safety related. There can be customer complaints or customer compliments, for example, not necessarily only negative. You could also be recording positive things. In order to classify this correctly and process it correctly with all the relevant entities within the dynamic system, we need to specify the site. Within the site, we have the location. This particular incident occurred at the turnstile at gate 913. The person who reported this incident was a guy named Pierre. Pierre looks after our value stream. Notice that the reported by and recorded by people can be different. We need to give it a basic cause at this point in time. Again, these lists will be configured for your specific situation and are used in gathering statistics or driving particular triggers in the system for different rules. In this specific one, we are going to relate it to maintenance because we think that there might have been a problem with the maintenance of the turnstile. As it turns out, when we do the investigation, we'll find that there's a different root cause. The department needs to be filled out. A lot of fun happens in operations. And then we will provide some details. So the details: when entering the factory, John's arm was caught between the turnstile and the cage. The turnstile continued to rotate and crushed his forearm. The source of the incident was the turnstile. The work activity being done at the time was maintenance related, and the severity, we believe, because this was actually an incident that required medical attention, we believe this was moderate, perhaps even major, but let's put in moderate for now. So we've got the essential information of the incident all captured on the right-hand side. We click OK, and the system will then take us to the details screen. On the incident details screen, there are a couple of things to note. The top is basically a repeat of what we've just captured, with some additional fields which we might want to fill in still. There are some tabs below that for the incident itself, for the interpretation, or in other words, the initial analysis of what happened, details about any investigations that might be initiated as a result of this incident, any costs, any claims, or any other associations within the system. In general, we will work through from top to bottom. At this stage, we've captured the essential information, so we can close the incident and come back later. At this stage also, relevant people will have been notified, as has been configured in the system. There will be typically a group of people who will receive an email to notify them of a new incident that has been captured, and within the company, somebody like the safety manager will be assigned to do the initial interpretation. The status of the incident can also be changed at this point in time. It can be put into triage. What is meant by triage is that what we often do is we have multiple reports around the same incident. So several people might see the same thing and report it simultaneously, but just from different locations. So we would put all of those into a triage area to decide which one to take action on. We can also close the incident off. That's not necessarily wise at this point in time because we've not done any investigation. So let's go through to the next tab, the incident tab, and take a look at what's here. Here we can see that there are several other pieces of information which could be filled in that might relate to this incident. I'm going to pause the recording now, fill out some of this information, and then come back and explain what I've done. So the first information that I filled in is the name of the supervisor, who is Pierre, who is responsible for the value stream. We then filled in the second level supervisor, Molly, who is the operations manager, and the highest level supervisors, namely Tony, who's production manager, and Lawrence, who is the president. The other information that I've just filled in was the incident classification. These classifications can drive the reporting requirements in terms of company procedures and policy, but also in terms of legislation. In this particular example, it was a crushed arm, forearm, and it would require hospitalization and further treatment that would result in more than 7 days off of work. If we then go to the incident information here, we estimate after hours there's approximately 50 people at work during the evenings. This did take place at the normal workspace. It did take place overtime, and it is work-related. This information is used in terms of claims management and in terms of statutory reporting as well. If the incident is reportable, we need to switch that on. Under legislation, certain types of safety-related incidents have to be reported to the authorities. And we have a flag here which also specifies whether or not it is confidential. On the next tab, we have the source. We filled out the source in the beginning, which was the turnstile. On review, we might change that. In this case, I'm going to leave it as is. We have a list of the objects that were affected. What's important to note is that these incidents are linked through to the objects in the system. so that you can see from the object view any incidents that might have happened on that object. So the link is two ways. So we're going to add an object here, and we're going to add the turnstile itself. Fortunately, in our little company, we've got the turnstile configured here, so we can add it as easily as that. We then go to the What Happened tab. I'm not going to classify this accident at this point in time. And under the detail, I have entered, when entering the factory, John's arm was caught between the turnstile and the cage. The turnstile continued to rotate and crushed his forearm. Under the workers injured, we need to specify who was injured and what type of injury was incurred. So let's create one here. As you can see, some of the fields have been filled in already for us. Employee was injured in the turnstile. The worker in this case is John. Our warehouse worker. The date and time has been filled in for us. The injury or illness type. This was an injury. The body part that was affected, arm. The outcome type, days away from work. And the case open date has been filled in for us. So we've now created an injury for this particular incident. As you can see, we can create multiple injuries, either per person or with multiple people, all against the same incident. That will allow us to process the claims, if there are any claims, as well as any medical expenses, etc., together with each other. We can also fill out details of third parties that might have been injured. These may be contractors or people that are not in the HR database on our own system. We may fill out details of any witnesses. If the incident is particularly severe, for example, a fatality, this information will be very important. And under the Reportable tab, here we can fill out information relating to the agency to which we have reported this incident, the date, and whether or not it is the primary agency for this particular incident. At this point in time, we can save that and come back later. Typically, the interpretation, which is the next step, is done by an objective participant, like the safety manager, who will do a basic analysis of the cause, any unsafe acts and conditions that might have contributed to the incident, and most importantly, determine whether or not an investigation is going to be required. I'm going to add some causes now. Pause the video and we'll come back when I've done that. Having done my initial investigation, I have determined as the safety officer that the primary cause of this particular incident was rushing, haste, lack of caution. What happened was that John had a toolbox. He should have put the toolbox through the side gate, but in his rush to get through the turnstile, he carried the toolbox with him. He then became crushed in the very tight, confined space because he had all this extra mass to carry through, and that was the primary cause of the incident. But there are some secondary causes. The reason he was rushing was that he had some personal problems and stresses, which made him late for shift. And another reason was that he failed to observe standard protocols or procedures at the gate. So the safety officer at this point in time has done a very high-level investigation, and it's not a very detailed investigation, but it is sufficient perhaps to close off a minor incident. In this specific example, it's not a minor incident really, because there was off time. So we're going to go and classify the level of investigation that is needed. So we're going to say that the likelihood of this happening in future is quite high, and the impact of it happening is quite severe, which means that the level of investigation that will need to flow from this incident is going to be treated as a high-level investigation. So back to our overview screen now. We've captured the basic information around the incident. We've done some preliminary interpretation of the incident, and we've decided that this needs to be investigated as a high-level investigation. So we can come back to this tab and open up the Investigation tab. Notice that we can create an investigation, and the nature of the screen indicates that we can create multiple investigations per incident. So if it is a major incident, let's say for example a big fire or an explosion, there may be multiple investigations required in order to establish what needs to be done going forward. So we're going to click on the Create Investigation button, and on the right hand side we get some basic parameters to fill in. Typically in our company, investigations are handled by the operations manager as the person responsible, particularly the high level one, and that gentleman is Tony. We also typically notify the president of any high level investigations that take place. And I'm going to copy the description from the original incident into the investigation so that we have a consistent reference. So we now get taken to a very similar screen to the incident screen, but this time it's an investigation screen. The investigation has been assigned an identity, it has been put into created state, and a lot of the information from the original incident have been pulled through to the investigation. We can see the relationship between the investigation and the incident in this table here. And again, it's a many-to-many relationship. Any incident can have multiple investigations. Any investigation can be linked back to multiple incidents. So in a sense, this is a parallel process that is similar to the incident itself, but it is now got slightly different focus and criteria in order to close it off. If we have a look at the panels, like we did with the incident, we go through some general information which has been pre-populated. We can get information around the incidents. We also get information around the injuries that were captured. Now, the system has automatically pulled that through from the incidents that have been linked. In this case, we have the one injury to John's arm. We have any areas that need to be covered or are covered by this investigation. Remember, this was linked through to the turnstile. What this also means is that later, if we have a look at the turnstile object, we will be able to see that there was an investigation against that particular piece of equipment or object. And that can be very important when preparing our safety plans around future maintenance on that, in that area. The primary purpose of the investigation is to do a root cause analysis and to make some recommendations. This is done in 3 steps. We determine the causes. Again, the information from the incident has been pulled through and is identical at this point in time. And I'm not going to change it here just for the sake of brevity. What we then do, once having established the causes, is we might go through a checklist. So what we have configured in the system is a number of checklists. These act to make sure that we've covered all of the necessary steps needed before we can close off an investigation. So let's, for example, just add a occupational health and safety incident checklist. You will not be able to close this incident off until the status of these questionnaires has been marked as complete. I'm not going to go into the questionnaires during this scenario, but essentially they are a series of questions which you then need to answer yes or no, and your answers need to be complete before the questionnaire can be completed off. That is an auditable formal record that you now place into the system around it's almost a declaration, if you like, of what you've done around the particular incident investigation. And finally, there's no point in doing an investigation if you don't come out with some recommendations to the business to make sure it doesn't happen again. So I'll fill out some example information here and come back. Okay, to reorient ourselves, we've created the investigation. A lot of information has been pulled through from the related incidents. We've determined the root cause. We've completed our checklist, and we're now putting in the conclusions. Under the conclusions, we have the provision for lessons learned. Lessons learned, as determined by the committee, time pressures caused rushed work leading to accidents. All tasks need to be assigned sufficient time. Supervision needs to watch out for rushed jobs. The impact of this particular incident was estimated at £10,000 and was classified as severe. Key lesson learned: don't rush. Key actions taken: improved supervision and procedures. We can also capture unsafe acts and conditions at this point. So we've identified in terms of our standard list of unsafe acts, and I just want to show you the typical list. Again, these would be determined by your company's procedures and policies. So we identified that the task not completed, in other words, the toolbox should have been placed through the side gate as part of the standard procedure. That was not done, and John rushed through the turnstile holding his toolbox. And the other unsafe act is that there was no supervision at the time, that the security guard was not present in order to ensure that there was compliance to the procedures. We can put in details against each of these. So under the task not completed, we can explain exactly what we mean here for the record. The improvement plan, what this allows us to do is to assign actions against a specific safety plan. Safety plans will be discussed in more detail in the permit to work section. We can assign a target date and the name of a responsible person, in this case our production manager again. And finally, we can assign activities in the system that will then be tracked against the recommendations of this investigation. That completes a very high-level overview of the entire process of recording an incident, creating an associated investigation, and completing all the necessary information and recommendations.